Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for sticking around with me. Dr. Anthony Fauci is back again, yet again, making more rounds for the cameras as the GOP prepares to ramp up investigations into Dr. Fauci and the origins of COVID-19. Now, Dr. Fauci, as much as he would like you to think otherwise, is very closed-minded on getting answers from China as to how this global virus was unleashed on the world. We already know how because we have eyes and ears and common sense and two brain cells to rub together. Maybe this beefed up virus that started in Wuhan was beefed up in the Wuhan lab where they beef up viruses. Oh, especially considering how China has covered it up and not been at all transparent with the rest of the world about how this started. Oh, that would make sense. But no. Dr. Fauci has to cover for his CCP pals. Here he is on Face the Nation the other day saying he just doesn't know what people mean when they say that China might, just might, have covered up the origins of COVID-19.
The Washington Post editorial board had an interesting piece on this recently. I don't know if you read it, but about the secrecy regarding the origins. And it says the world owes those who died, 6 million people, but probably twice that or more, to be better prepared in the future. The cover-up is immense and still in place. China should now agree to a full and thorough scientific investigation that returns to Wuhan. Do you agree with that word, cover up, and intentional distortion?
I don't know what that means. No, it isn't that I agree or disagree. I'm not sure what they're talking about. I mean, if cover up is not allowing people to come in and look at all the data, that's not a cover up. That's not being transparent. To me, a cover-up
like the animals being killed before anyone could go into the market to investigate that.
Again, I don't want to. It's going to be taken out of context by others for sure, but that's my life. Welcome to it.
Whoa, shut up. Don't ask me tough questions or I might have to answer them and then the people will take them out of context.
Right. So as people observe that there's insurmountable evidence that COVID was unleashed from the Wuhan lab and that China covered it up to save their own rear ends, Dr. Fauci is covering up China's cover-up, and he's parroting the regime's talking points, and he's spouting anti-scientific babble and has throughout the pandemic because it aligned with the interests of his political buddies. It aligns with the interests of the Democratic Party. It was the Democrats who pushed lockdowns, vaccines, and masks, all of which we know did not work, but Fauci was their tool of authority. He's a scientist. Trust the science. But don't worry. Dr. Fauci assures us that actually he's not at all political. It's silly to insist otherwise, according to the guy shilling for a lying communist regime. Watch.
They've clearly politicized it. You know, they say that I'm not political at all, period. I've never been, and anybody who knows anything about me knows that that's the case. But it is very clear when people are running their campaigns with an anti-Fauci element to it. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, this is a public health issue. So, yeah, it's going to keep going, likely much more geared towards me. I mean, it's obviously a political issue. I'm not going to get involved. I didn't get involved before in the politics, and I'm not going to get involved now in the politics.
I'm not political. What are you talking about? All I've done is align myself entirely with Democratic Party interests.
And spouted the talking points that they want him to spout, even though he was wrong about all of them.
He's just interested in the science.
Right. Kent Heckenlively joins me now. He is a two-time New York Times bestseller and co-author of the book Presidential Takedown, How Anthony Fauci, the CDC, NIH, and the World Health Organization conspired to overthrow President Trump. Kent, it's great to have you on the show. Dr. Fauci is insisting he's not at all political. Your response?
Well, you know, here's an interesting fact for your viewers. Let's talk about the amount of money that Dr. Fauci and Francis Collins were responsible for administering every single year. That number is $30 billion of research grants every year given out to science. That is an enormous amount of influence. Now, let's look at other, instances of influence. How much does it cost to elect a president of the United States? Well, in 2020, both parties spent $5 billion. So what that means is every year, Fauci and Francis Collins have had 6 times the amount of money to hand out and walking around money to scientists to enforce their will. And the idea that he's not political is extremely laughable, especially because Anthony Fauci himself has talked about how his favorite book of philosophy is The Godfather by Mario Puzo, and he's even talked about it in his National Geographic documentary. He loves the line, "It's not personal, it's just business." So this idea that Fauci is not political is laughable. And what my co-author, Dr. Paul Alexander, suffered at the hands of Fauci, even though he was the senior pandemic advisor, is the subject of our book. And you said it very well, that we who were watching this were suspicious of Fauci. But what this book does is it takes you inside the COVID-19 task force with Dr. Paul Alexander, who was brought in as the evidence-based medicine expert. So that means he was the one who really was Mr. Science, looking at, the strength of different studies. And what happened was Dr. Alexander was against the schools being closed. He was against masking. He was against this crazed rush to a vaccine. Focused protection of the elderly was probably a good suggestion, as put forth in the Great Barrington Declaration. But if you really want to know how corrupt our public health system is, that's what Presidential Takedown is about.
Now, and obviously, it takes you inside the mind of this task force and how they operate and how they're able to evade accountability, because what you just cited about Dr. Paul Alexander being against those things, in summation, it just means he was right. Right, he was right. Dr. Fauci and the rest of the CDC and WHO and NIH, they were wrong. How do you think, as the GOP is preparing to ramp up investigations into Fauci, the origins of COVID, how do you think Fauci is going to wiggle his way out of this and China wiggle their way out of this? Because we know that they're all hiding things from the rest of the world. Do you think we'll get sufficient answers through investigations?
It's a great question. Now, let me say, first of all, I'm not here for Team Red or Team Blue. I'm here for Team Humanity. And I think what's important for everybody to understand is the enormous amount of money which is involved with these questions. And what concerns me is that this enormous amount of money is, being used to influence Democrats, but it's also being used to influence Republicans. So what I have done is I have sent a copy of this book to Senator Rand Paul. I've sent a copy to Congressman Jim Jordan. I'm sending one to Congressman Steve Scalise. Dr. Alexander is having conversations behind the scene with the Republican leadership to help out with the investigation. I was not a part of the COVID-19 task force, just writing Dr. Alexander's stories, but I've written a lot about corruption in science, and I have put that Republican leadership on notice that I am happy to help in their investigations and suggest avenues of investigation. And so I am completely open to helping out that effort. And I suggest that the members of the committee start by getting a copy of my book and reading it.
Now, before we go, Kent, we're almost out of time. I want to play a clip of Fauci also being questioned by Meet the Press about whether or not we're still in a pandemic. Here was his answer.
Is this country ready for another pandemic? And are we still in the one we have not, that we've been talking about?
Well, we certainly are still in it.
So we are certainly still in a pandemic, so says Fauci, Kent. Now, I live in California, in San Diego, one of the hardest hit places by COVID in America. We're not in any sort of pandemic mode whatsoever, so I'm not sure what he's talking about, Kent. Are we in the pandemic still? Are we still going through the rough and tough of it?
This is the same kind of fear porn that they've been playing for the past 2 years. And what I'd like to say is, Presidential Takedown is really written so that the average person can understand the science. And I think that's kind of my superpower is I'm the simplifier. I tend to work with highly educated people. Dr. Alexander, is one of the world's leading evidence-based medicine experts. And I'm kind of like the smart person translator. So Presidential Takedown will lead people through the fear porn, why it's wrong, and why we should get back to normal life.
Kent, thank you so much for joining the show. Where can people go to buy this book, Presidential Takedown?
So you can go to Amazon, any places you buy books, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble. You can find me at Presidential Takedown on Twitter. You can also find my website is KentHeckenlivelyBooks.com.
All right, you heard it there, folks. Kent Heckenlively, thank you so much for joining the show today. Very insightful. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.